So, continuing on from the previous discussion of, street criminals in the Soviet Republic from November 1917, just to refresh or emphasize, it was not only the recidivist criminals or opportunist criminals, but it was also the officers and those who had been cops under the Tsar. And was there another group? Possibly, uh, government workers, like public sector, scumbags, basically. Clout workers, we'd call them in Chicago. Yeah, there's, people I worked with in Chicago, their friends and family, many of them were criminals. So, in a what situation where their world gets turned upside down and the normal people, come to power, and scum like that is repressed, scum becomes outlawed, becomes criminals, and starts to engage in, violent crime. So, and so, this went on through the winter 1917, 1918. And Peters from the Cheka wrote that the fight against bandits, these scum, absorbed all of our attention until we moved to Moscow. And so they reinstated the death penalty for criminal acts. It had been suspended. I believe maybe that was suspended even in the February Revolution, but probably the October Revolution. And the state took over capital punishment from the Soviets, the local councils, and the masses. And added to these problems in February 1918, so we're talking about, what is it, November, December, January, so 3 months and a half, 3.5 months after the Workers' Revolution, the German state came and attacked Russia. And, I guess opportunistically. And so, uh, February 18th, they did that. February 21st, the Council of People's Commissars issued a decree: the socialist fatherland is in danger. And in that situation, they needed a reliable rear for the front. So they, in that decree, point number 8 was, quote, enemy agents, speculators, thugs, hooligans, counter-revolutionary agitators, and German spies will be shot at the scene of the crime. So, this resolution expanded the powers of the Cheka, and let's see. Okay, that's not a relevant page. Next page. Most executions by the Cheka were proper, according to the author. The central authorities tried to stop lynchings, by local councils, and the penalties, were issued through newspaper, denunciations and pronunciations, but lynchings continued in the provinces, where they didn't have. Even in the early spring of 1918, the Cheka did not control the whole nation, and so, in the provinces, I would imagine, where you didn't have such law and order, because you didn't have a Cheka organized or strong enough, the local councils of the people basically had to institute red vigilantism. So, March 9th, 1918, the Cheka moved to Moscow and started to become a national organization. So that's when things started to get more regularized, and you didn't get more, you didn't get your random lynchings of criminals. And for the Petrograd Cheka, during this period, most cases, 102, were of speculation. That is, some cockroach capitalist jacks up, doubles the price on some items. That was outlawed under the revolution by basically the vast majority of society are workers or peasants, and peasants are famous for hating Jews. Why? Because Jews were basically merchants, and merchants generally would speculate. They would raise the price of items or cheat the peasant on payment of grain. I was told a story by a Polish comrade in my family's town of how the Jew would cheat some peasant from the village. The peasant would bring in 3 bushels of grain, and the Jew would only pay him for 2, after crying and pretending that he was poor. Anyway, so those people were arrested and oftentimes shot. And then let's see, speculation with a criminal intent. I guess maybe this was over contraband or something. Those were 14 cases. So the first one was 102. The second one was 14 cases. 61 cases of outright criminality. Probably mugging people or assaulting them. 18 cases were political. That is counter-revolutionary agitation or conspiracy, and 13 cases were dismissed. So, you're talking about, what is that, 162, almost 200 cases, 13 were dismissed, so that's 5% dismissed, let's say. The death penalty was not, including for political opponents, was not really practiced systematically, I guess, until August of 1918. The main focus was on Petrograd profiteering and banditry. So speculators, enemies of the people, I didn't highlight and notate, or I notated but not highlighted. So let's see if I can get through all of this or not. But basically, so that those were the 2 prongs of the problem. Was probably merchants basically doubling the prices of goods or more, quadrupling the prices perhaps, and because it was a siege and a war situation. And then outright criminals mixed in with, former officers, former cops, former city workers, basically robbing people. What do they call them? Highway robbers, highway robbery. So, yeah. And, basically, you can, for example, you can take photos with period costume actors here. And I've come across these people, through my time here in the former Soviet Union, and it was pointed out to me that they're very friendly, and then you take the photo, and then they get very threatening. Like, okay, give us money now. That sort of thing, right? Like highway robbery with threat of violence. So, that's a mild case. I mean, back then it was probably, like Uritsky, the Soviet official, had his coat stolen when it was minus 20 out. And, these robbers probably had some sort of handgun and were probably going to shoot Uritsky if he didn't give up the coat. So, yeah, in that situation, right, if you're, say, family workers and dad gets his coat stolen but has to go to work and provide for the family, that's a serious thing, right? So you're going to report that to the local council of your fellow workers, and that happens more than once, twice, 3 times. The workers are going to go looking for these bandits. They probably know who they are, Because they were before they were the scumbags they knew in their community, and then the cops they knew, the officers perhaps maybe they didn't know as well, or maybe they did, and the city workers, they probably knew who they were, and they were like, okay, grab them, string them up on the lamppost. So, let's see. So, and in this period, there was a request for more commissars and staff in the Cheka because of overwork and the moral responsibility of basically killing these scumbags led to nervous breakdowns. And the criminal world and the anarchist world became close. They called these crimes requisitions. And for the anarchists, these robberies were a way to finance their groups. So, they would, and basically had an alliance of anarchists with an army of criminals. 2,000 anarchists in Moscow. And it led to an armed conflict between the Cheka and the anarchists. The anarchists had their Black Guard. And, let's see. So basically the anarchists would, march into some bourgeois mansion in Moscow and take it over. Or they would, and they would basically kidnap the bourgeois, and one of them in particular was known for scalping, cut the scalp off a bourgeois, and then take some cologne, pour it over the scalp, alcohol, basically torture the guy to find out where the valuables are, and then, torture him to death and kill him. This was barbaric and unacceptable. Our side would simply shoot people, twice right there. That was a quick way of disposing of social garbage. So what? In April 1918, the Cheka met up, and they said, okay, well, these anarchists and the criminals, they're organizing together. They've got 25 strongholds throughout Moscow, and they're basically murdering and torturing people, relatively randomly, and assaulting and robbing working people, the working class population, as I mentioned before, they thought these people were scum because they were victimized by them. And so, much like in New York City or, New York City, I guess, is a good example, because there you have, the perfect storm of petty bourgeois, shopkeeper, merchant scum, mafia scum, Irish political scum, etc., and they allow the black and Latin street criminal scum to rob and terrorize the working class population, or the masses in New York. And so that's kind of what was going on in Moscow, apparently. And so the Cheka decided, okay, we've got to go in basically with SWAT teams. And so they went in, they assaulted these mansions, 30 casualties on the anarchist side, 12 casualties on the Chekist side. There was an account, I believe it was Lockhart's, maybe, or one of them, Riley, one of them, British counter-revolutionaries, but for some reason he was brought on a raid to be shown what the Cheka was doing and why. And so I think it was Peters from the Cheka, he was number 2. In Moscow, they raided, I think it was in Moscow, maybe Petrograd, but they raided one of these mansions that these anarchists had taken over. And, they had to shoot their way in. And the reporter, the English reporter, spy, walked into the main, would have been the main dining room of this bourgeois, and the anarchists had staged like basically an orgy for days and days, and just the carpets were filthy, and basically anarchists were dead and criminals. Most of them were criminals, actually, not anarchists. They were laying on the carpets, and one prostitute young woman was shot through the mouth, I guess, and bleeding out through the back of her head. And Petrus was like, well, it's probably for the best. Some little fucking whore scumbag. Her life was ended because she hung around with a bunch of fucking, violent criminals. And, she was a criminal herself, so, good riddance. And let's see, Dzerzhinsky, the head of the Cheka, took part in this assault. The Cheka had, relatively few employees. I think it was like 23, I read, to start. And maybe it's 30 or 50, armed officers going on raids. And then basically in the end, they arrested 400 to 600 criminals mostly. A quarter of them were immediately released. And among them were women, teenagers, and school children. These Aitushki, these alternative type of kids, thrill seekers, stupid kids, and then dumb whores who want to get involved with, scumbag criminals. But, they're not the worst, so, they got released. And also among the scum were, officers, career criminals, and white guards is what my note says. So, the National Central Executive of the Revolutionaries said, our fight is with bandits, not with anarchists and ideological anarchism. They arrested 500. There were 30 whites and 70 criminals. So 100, 1/5, 20% were, either hardcore criminals or hardcore revolutionaries. And what was it? Oh, okay, yes. So after May 1918, after these raids, anarchism declined sharply. They were repressed also in Kursk and Vitebsk, which is now part of northeast Belarus, I guess it is. And the anarchists there, criminals, had carried out 1,000 pogroms, raids, and lynchings. And, certainly Vitebsk, that was a very, it was Marc Chagall's town. It was a Jewish town. Probably most of Vitebsk was Jewish until, the capitalists came and murdered everyone. And so, when you're talking about raids, lynchings, pogroms, most Jews there, I would guess, were probably like artisans. So they weren't the best socially, but many of them were Buntists or, communist Buntists. And, I'm sure there were merchants, Jewish merchants in Vitebsk, who really cares about them so much. The artisans, were, fairly decent people. So, and you even had probably some workers there, like garbage men or, street sweepers or possibly light industrial factory workers. This is, like early in the revolution. So, you had extrajudicial executions. Oh, he was trying to escape, so I shot him. Kind of typical cop stuff. So you did have some, excesses. Yeah, so the anarchists, though, ideologically, they were like, well, we have the right to torture the bourgeoisie, we hate them, and we want to find out where the valuables are, we have the right to steal, etc. Cute story there. I knew this old whore, she lives in France now, and she was a model, she went to Bennington College, and seemed like a very, at one point she was attractive, not anymore, but intelligent, person with ballpark politics, anti, I don't know, neoliberal, anti corporate capitalist, even politics. Ended up she tried to scam me for some hundreds of dollars, and I won't go into the whole story, it's kind of long, but basically it was a utility bill scam, and I kind of checked 3 or 4 times on what she was asking for, and concluded that this was, yeah, it was like she sent me some link, it was, the link was weird, it turned out to be a scam. So I blocked her on Facebook, and then her buddy was this coon ass, French descended anarchist from the USA somewhere, became a carpenter, and he moved to France. And when his little anarchist, friend moved in with him, wife, and she was an anarchist. But there he made statements like this to the effect of, "Oh, it's right to take. There's no morals. It's just taking. You have to be a soldier." Well, basically, it's an army of crime, and in the end, these kind of ultra lefts ally themselves with criminals, and they become bandits, and they lose all sort of like moral sense, and so. This is what happened, in the beginning of the October Revolution was, and also they then, so in allying themselves with these criminals, they then turn on the working class population at the same time, and the working class looks at them as like degenerates and as victimizers, and so it was very popular to basically string up criminals and criminals who were associated with these anarchist bandits. So, what else? Oh, and also a lot of these anarchists over here, especially in the East, but also in the U.S., they end up working for the Democrats and their color revolutions because okay, I hate cops, or I hate normal petty bourgeois or working class white people, so we're going to attack them on the street, right? Or here it's, I hate the government, whoever was, the leader in Ukraine, over Maidan, or I hate, the government in Belarus, so I'm going to work with the CIA and work to destroy my society, and I'll work with Nazis and criminals and other shit. So, basically the point is, that's where anarchism leads. You can't trust these people; they're fucking scum. So, let's see. So, but April 12th, most ideological anarchists were released by the Cheka. But they viewed anarchism as directly counter-revolutionary, or counter-revolutionary by misunderstanding. As I just was talking about, they executed some prominent anarchists, Lapshin, Lipskowitz, I guess in Moscow, etc. And they also went to war against the social revolutionary maximalists. Uh, yeah, and or yeah, yeah. Anyway, so um, okay, and then other currents like the Mensheviks and the right SRs were arrested as ideological enemies, but not executed. But there was a threat of execution. If they try to violently overthrow the revolutionary government, will shoot you. Excuse me. So then, moving on. Um, right. So June of 1918. Um, there were still left social revolutionaries on the board of the Moscow Cheka, and there were 18 members total, and everyone had to agree on the death penalty for an individual to carry out, that death penalty. Um, and In June 1918, cases of note, there were three very large speculators, a provocateur, and a traitor. There was also the Tambov Rebellion. Tambov is kind of eastern central Russia, and the revolutionary government shot 50 in Tambov. Then in July 1918, another 11. Um, uh, And, Peters and the leadership of the Cheka said, well, if all branches of the Cheka handled the rest of the country like the Cheka and the Tambov handled things, that is, shooting 61 in the province, then the counter-revolution would only last a few days. And Peters himself was sentimental, and he became physically ill at having to sign death warrants. But, he was a fanatical opponent of capitalism and a fanatical Bolshevik, which, you had to be in the face of 14 armies invading and massive rebellion from, these officer, pig, public sector cockroach scum and criminal scum. So, excuse me. Um, and, yeah, so, anyhow, I guess I'll stop it there.